Hamid Pouran. I am Program Leader for Sustainability and Climate Change, MSc at University of Wolverhampton. Today, I am talking with Professor Michael LaBelle, author of Energy Cultures, Technology, Justice, and Geopolitics in Eastern Europe. Professor Michael LaBelle is Associate Professor at Central European University and currently a visiting fellow at Chatham House, London. Michael, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited.
It's a pleasure to have you today. So energy security in Europe, the term that we hear these days quite a lot, considering the crisis that we are facing in Ukraine. So could you tell us what energy security means and what does it mean for Europe?
Yeah, it's a great question and a difficult one to start off with. So let's maybe what I can tell you is what it's not, or how I would like to reposition it. I mean, it's not security of supply. So security of supply would be, do we have enough energy resources or say electricity to support the current energy system? And so that's security of supply. And energy security itself is, the state of it's much more tied into national security and ensuring that there is a sufficient amount of security apparatus. That's the expression of both hard power, kind of like military in terms, and national sovereignty. So it gets really wrapped up into the defense and the viability of I would say the state and the aims of the state itself.
Okay, so what kind of resources do we have for energy in Europe? Do we have a lot of like a nuclear, coal, oil, gas? Where do this come from?
I like your questioning. Oh, I mean, in a sense, we could actually characterize Europe as energy poor. Okay. So this is the big problem with Europe, and I would say we could call it Western Europe. We could even talk about maybe the European Union and those member states, and including Norway. Norway has oil, but overall, Europe traditionally is and has been energy poor, and this is why it's so reliant on imports. And this is really how it shapes. I would say that's when we talk about energy security, how it shapes its international relations and how industry itself, how viable and how competitive it is on a global level.
So when we talk about energy poor Europe, historically, considering that the main sources of energy were fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas. Now, I have actually two questions. First is Russia's role in providing energy for Europe, considering Nord Stream or Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. And also renewables. Can we say that Europe will be energy sufficient considering renewable techs that we have? Or can we eliminate Russia from energy portfolio of Europe in immediate future or near future?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I take the first question, which is about, sorry, what was your first question?
No, the first question was, can new technologies help us, like renewables, help Europe to be energy independent or energy sufficient?
Yeah, so with that first question, yes, of course. And I would say that by the very definition and how renewables operate, it's much more localized, much more decentralized. So it can really build up a much more energy secure energy system, and one that is a bit more tied into how people use and perceive the energy system. So for example, solar panels on houses is very important, but equally important is, I would say, the energy efficiency of houses themselves and how people interact both with the built environment, their houses, or where they work, and whether they leave the lights on. So this whole energy use, the energy demand that people actually interact with, is very important when we talk about the energy system and renewables. But also another factor in that, though, too, is the energy system itself in what other sources it's using. So oil, gas, non-renewable energy, because it still makes up a large component and will, even in the, we could say short term to medium term, will still influence the energy system. So all these factors of both, yes, we need to use renewable energy, and that's basically the only way forward, especially for an energy secure energy system. But we also have to acknowledge that non-renewables are, even if they can be phased out at a faster pace, and our own perceptions nowadays still will have a major influence on the energy market.
And that's the problem. That's the,
Yeah.
where you're considering the current climate. Russia is a major producer for oil and gas, and the Europe depends on import of these energy resources from Russia. So the question is, in near future, we cannot be independent from energy imports from Russia. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's definitely correct. Is just we could say the cost is too high, but also, for example, Poland, Hungary. Poland, I think, is 90% dependent on Russian oil. Hungary is 80%, and their refineries are set up for Russian oil.
Okay.
So for them to shift away from Russian oil is possible. Just it takes time. They'll have to redo the refineries, for example. Same thing with gas, and the necessity to move away from gas can't be done overnight. So there's this big push, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, just technically at the moment, to turn everything off would be a problem. And I'm totally supportive of turning everything off as quickly as possible. But there's the technical factor in that has to be in place to turn everything off. And hopefully it can be done in a matter of months. It depends on the country. So I'm sitting here in the UK, and they've set the goal at the end of the year to have no Russian oil, but it's quite easy for them to diversify. They're not that dependent. It's only at like 5%, I think it is, that they've used in the past for Russian oil or gas. So it's just a minor inconvenience for them to change, where in Poland or in Hungary, and as say Poland, as anti-Russian as they are, there's still this necessity for the moment to rely on Russia.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. The current issues, do they affect development of renewables? Do we see more and more investment in renewable techs? And does it include going back or making or creating more public interest in nuclears as well?
Mm-hmm. I would say it's a bit, from a policy perspective, we could say, yes, the rhetoric and the policies and the goals of the policies have been ramped up since February 24th, when Russia decided to invade Ukraine. So we can see that there is this shift, or I would say like a speeding up of the existing plans that were in place. And so now what we have to see is what exact policies are going to be implemented to encourage more renewables to be built. And that would include, of course, wind and solar, but also I would say investment to energy efficiency, which can make a huge difference, which there's still great opportunities in that. So it's a whole host of things that need to be done, but let's wait. I don't want to say let's wait and see, because the policies are there, but things were, I would say, slowing down anyways in the investment to renewable energy. And the governments of the EU have to get more serious about actually making this transition happen. And I think the biggest difference now is this perception that gas can be used as a transition fuel. I think so. Yes, we're going to see more renewables, and hopefully at a faster pace, or at least at the pace that people promise, but we're not delivering. And gas was seen as, especially for example, Germany. This is why the relationship with Russia was so important, and the role that gas was foreseen to play was this bridge, and we could kind of get by using gas instead of coal or instead of nuclear power. But it's quite clear we can't use gas as this bridging fuel. That there may be some industrial processes where gas is needed, and okay, that can stay for longer. but high-priced LNG gas in the European market, it's just too expensive for households. There's better alternatives. And also it is too competitive or too expensive for industry to be competitive on a global market when, for example, in America, they can rely on the domestic gas there for their industrial processes. So Europe is really challenged, and basically gas can be used from domestic sources or the North Sea with these agreements. So some pipeline gas, but to just replace all the pipeline gas from Russia with LNG, there's not enough capacity, and and that we could debate, but it's just simply too expensive.
But gas will remain an important part of Europe energy portfolio. Is that correct?
I'll just say no.
No, okay.
Let me be controversial.
Please,
because basically what the current war with Russia in Ukraine, and I would say the response by all countries, it just demonstrates that the age of fossil fuels needs to end. That it's not just Russia that's acting as an aggressor. There's other, we could say, states that do not act in a democratic way. And do we really want to keep our democracies built on authoritarian regimes around the world that don't respect human rights? And fossil fuels, particularly oil and even gas with LNG, where does that come from? Who's selling it? Who's making the money? And I think gas, as much as possible, so and the technology does need to catch up, but the faster that gas and all fossil fuels are phased out of the European energy system, the much better and more secure European homeowners will be, and actually more competitive European industry will be.
Okay. Perhaps another difficult question. Is it okay, or is it acceptable that we say Europe needs to invest more in nuclear because it's safe, it's on demand, it's relatively clean compared to other sources? It makes Europe independent from importing gas. Does it make sense if we consider that approach?
Yeah, the way you phrase it, it makes sense. So yes, we should do it. But there's, I would say, another reality in that nuclear, the current market signal for electricity would be, yeah, let's build nuclear power. The reality and the current crisis would also indicate we need some, secure, large base load power for electricity. But the fact that it takes more than a decade to build a nuclear power plant and the huge amount of money and cost overrun for nuclear power really doesn't make it such a viable technology to invest in. I think it's fine. Like I personally, or even professionally, I would say nuclear can fill a need in the energy system for base load generation. But so far, there doesn't seem to be that much, I would say, it's just the downside of it and the length of time it takes to develop nuclear power plants is almost too long and becomes even more uncompetitive against solar and wind. And of course, we need energy storage, but that seems to be more realistic, that viable energy storage will be coming in for grid stability. And that's more likely than a large-scale nuclear program being successful.
So if we invest in storage capacity and new battery technologies, we are better off compared to investing in nuclear. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is we have the renewables down, the wind, the solar. We still haven't like utilized energy efficiency to a large extent to what we can do. But the big key for the grid stability for electricity is the investment into storage. And, there's lithium ion batteries, but there's other forms of energy storage that are being put out there that are well developed already. Just, more large scale trial projects are necessary, and those can come into the market. But what's also important is the regulation to encourage and to incentivize and to actually pay for storage technologies, for example, electricity grid. and the market itself has to be changed. The regulations have to be changed to ensure that those investors or those companies that are building these storage facilities are paid for their facilities and for operating in the grid.
Okay, and perhaps the last question, and which is follow-up of based on your previous comment. So it's not only energy generation which matters. Energy efficiency is crucial for us too, because it doesn't matter how much energy we produce, which does matter, but it's important that we don't waste it, right?
Yeah. So we always talk about, I would say, renewable energy. The generation side of the energy system seems to get the most notice
Attention.
and attention and investments, and this is what we're going to do. But on the flip side, the energy efficiency, there's already proven technologies and there's just this lack of will and effective government policies in almost every country to properly assist homeowners and businesses to reduce their energy consumption. And of course, it takes a lot of behavior change. So this is also important. Transportation, the transportation sector is important. And how do we shift people away from their cars? And I wouldn't say the electric cars are a solution either, but so there's a lot of how the built environment is made, how people, whether they can walk to the store, walk to their work, or whether they have to drive, that plays a big influence. But it's interesting because these high gas prices, high petrol prices really can influence the behavior. I'm not saying that this is the way we should do it, but it's a crisis, an energy crisis at the moment, and we shouldn't use it to double down or to prolong fossil fuels. Rather, we should take the money and the urgency of it and invest in proven technologies that reduce our usage of it and that are much more sustainable for the environment.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your time today. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have any other comments or any final comments on information?
No, I would just say, my final comment would be this war, of course, for everyone, except for probably Vladimir Putin, is a horrible, horrible event. And I'm in London right now, but I live in Hungary, and I see there's a different kind of perspectives depending how close you are to the war. And there's a different sense of urgency, and I see the political response in different countries being, on one hand, it is united that the European countries, most of them operate under NATO or unified through the European Union. But at the national level, there's also differences of opinions over whether we should rely on Russian oil and gas for the long term, medium term, short term. But overall, I think we really have to interpret the current crisis as, it's built up over time, and that fossil fuels are not an answer. And we really have to take this opportunity to think about homeowners. We have to think about people that actually have to drive their cars, that can't afford electric vehicles, that rely on fossil fuels to live and to just exist and not live in poverty. And fossil fuels are not the answer, but rather renewable energy and energy efficiency is the answer.
Do you think that it's a wake-up call for Europe?
Yeah, I think it is, because Europe has had these goals and they're always quite ambitious and more ambitious than other countries or other regions. But there's still a lot of foot dragging. Some of these past goals, like the 2020 goals, were not going to be met. It was only because of COVID that the 2020 goals were met, which actually meant that there wasn't not enough investment, not enough effort into this energy transition that needs to occur. And even the projections for the EU still rely a lot on carbon capture and storage, and it's still unproven. And so we really have to understand what has worked to date. Solar, wind, that definitely has worked, but we also have to look at what we haven't been doing, where there are opportunities, and that's how we need to address the current crisis.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.